Happy Pride, everyone! My asexual ass is here to answer your questions, so without further ado, let's get started with today's episode of Q&Play. First question comes from avthena. Have you ever been anxious/nervous about running a D&D campaign, and if you have, how did you handle it? I have been running my D&D campaign with my D&D group for about 4 years now, every week, so we have been playing a lot. But yeah, I still get really nervous when I'm running games, especially if I'm running a game that I know is a big one. A game that has a major event that I have planned out a long time ago, and I want to make it land. A big moment that could stick in the players' minds, and if I mess it up, then I lose that moment, and I don't like doing that. The way I prep my D&D campaigns is I usually have big set pieces in my head long before they happen. Like, for example, one that has already occurred in our D&D campaign is the showdown with Jaren Rook, the master of a gang in the wild west of my homebrew world. And yeah, that showdown was in my head for a long time. Jaren Rook is an outlaw who got his hands on the Horn of Orcus and uses it to transform himself into a demon in an epic showdown with the party. And I wanted it to be appropriately epic to boot. And if I messed up that moment, I would have lost it forever. But luckily, I prepped and I made sure that when the party faced down Jaren, I was ready with an awesome encounter and some awesome music as well. My confidence is often built by success. Every time something goes well in my D&D game, every time I feel a lot better about my ability to run. I haven't had a catastrophic failure in a while when I'm running my D&D campaign, so yeah, that's how I handle my nervousness, my anxiety. I look back on the moments that really make the campaign, the moments that were epic, those awesome nat 20s that make the party cheer, the musical rises that make the party go, holy shit, it's really going down. Like, that kind of thing is what I look back on whenever I'm nervous, because I look back on my successes and realize, yeah, I've done this before, and I can still do it now. Even just talking to my party about my campaign really builds up my confidence, because it proves to me that they care about my campaign, that they're thinking about it. That sort of thing really helps me whenever I'm feeling nervous about my D&D game. Knowing that my party love what I'm doing, that makes me really excited to run the game. Obviously, these are just the things that help me, but hopefully they can help you as well. Have you considered reading more comedic horror stories like the Farmer Joe story Crit Crab read off? Alright, so I figured this would be an interesting way for me to start talking about how I pick stories for my videos. Basically, I go to Reddit and I just search through top of the week for both RPG horror stories and D&D horror stories, both subreddits, and I just find stories that catch my eye. I give them a little read through, and then I screen cap them and save them into a folder for later use. And then when I'm making a video, I put together a bunch of stories that I think flow well next to each other. I generally try to have some mundane horror stories and then end off with something a bit more major. I don't want to traumatize my viewers, but I also don't want to bore my viewers, so it's a little bit of a tightrope balance. As for if I'm going to do more comedic horror stories, I mean, if one catches my eye, then yeah, a comedic story will go into the video. I'm not specifically excluding comedic stories for any reason whatsoever, I just haven't seen many that caught my eye and are the length that I want for an RPG horror stories video. Maybe in the future, but just not at the moment. Of course, whenever I do an RPG Horror Stories mega collection, a lot of medium and shorter stories go into those videos, and those usually are more comedic in tone. So yeah, whenever another one of those comes out, you might see more comedic horror stories. I got a ton of alignment questions, but I'll take this one from Zeonimation. How do you think chaotic neutral characters should be played? Here's my take. Alignment should be played in a way that makes the game more enjoyable. If you play your chaotic neutral character in a way that makes them fun for the rest of the party and for the DM to run a game for, then you're playing them right. You shouldn't hold following alignment to the letter above having fun at Dungeons & Dragons. You should be having a good time, your fellow players should enjoy playing with you, and your DM should enjoy running a game for you. If your alignment gets in the way of that, you are doing it wrong. Simple as that. As for how I personally interpret chaotic neutral, I mean, I've always interpreted it as the naive child sort of alignment. Because of Jester. It's mostly because of Jester, but that's always the kind of character that I associate with chaotic neutral. The way I specifically don't like it being played is the quasi-evil alignment. Don't play chaotic neutral as just a quasi-evil alignment. I hate it when people go, no, my character isn't evil. What are you talking about? I'm chaotic neutral. Yeah, I dismembered that innocent man in front of his kids, but you know, I'm a chaotic neutral character. It's what they would do, but I'm not evil, so you can't kill me because I'm still a decent person.
chaotic neutral.
I hate that. It's really annoying. Of course, though, if that sort of character is fun in your D&D campaign, I mean, hey, I can't stop you, and I don't want to, because as long as it's fun for you and your group, then great. You're playing D&D correctly, and you're playing your alignment the way it should be played. Just make sure that everyone is having a good time at your table, and you're set to the races. Next up, from Michael Connelly, what's some of your favorite homebrew content? Well, recently I have been getting into a lot of homebrew that adjusts the races in Dungeons & Dragons. I have 2 Air Genasi in my party, and we're both using a variant version of Air Genasi that allows them to essentially fly for a short period of time, and we've all been really enjoying it. I also love loot in Dungeons & Dragons, and so homebrew magic items are a godsend for me. Griffin Saddlebag makes some killer magic items, not just ones that are well designed, but also items that don't break the game in half. They're mostly just interesting additions to add to a character's build. A recent favorite of mine has to be the flamethrower that Griffin Saddlebag released on their subreddit, and yeah, this thing is pretty damn strong, but it uses alchemical fire as its ammunition. Alchemical fire is pretty expensive, so yeah, I think that is a good trade-off for this weapon. I do like weapons that specifically have a special type of ammunition that is kind of hard to come by. It makes them more powerful, but also makes them a risk-reward sort of thing. Do you use your ammunition now, or do you save it? I really like that sort of critical thinking that you force your players to do when you give them magic items like this. Base D&D has a lot of really great content, but the community makes so much good homebrew that I have just been diving into over the past few weeks, because I've taken a break from Dungeons & Dragons for the past 2 weeks because of my move. So yeah, it's given me time to look through all this homebrew, and I love every little bit of it. A lot of it I'm not going to use in my games, but just looking through what the community has built is just, I mean, it's strangely wholesome, I guess. Question from RandomNPC. So my question is, should you allude to your players that next session there might be an encounter in order for them to have better prepared spell slots, or does that ruin the immersion? It depends on you as a dungeon master how difficult your encounters are. Like, is it necessary for your players to manage their spell slots and their gear in your D&D game? In my game, I toss out an encounter every session. My players are aware that I pretty much have an encounter every session, and therefore will have stuff ready. Like when they're looking at the map, if they see a giant amount of black space, that means that there's a lot of rooms in this map. That means they're in a dungeon. That means there's going to be multiple encounters. My players know how I play my D&D game, how I run my D&D game, and therefore they are loosely aware of when there's going to be a combat encounter. Therefore, I don't really have to foreshadow much. They know how my game is structured, and when they can see a combat encounter on the horizon, they get ready for it, which is necessary in my D&D games. My combat is run pretty tight to the wire. Of course, I want my party to succeed, but I want their success to feel earned. I want it to be through some kind of adversity, especially since this is supposed to be a more down-to-earth pirates game. I want them to have boots on the ground. I want it to be a little bit more grungy, a little bit more difficult, and having difficult combat is one way that I feel like I could achieve that. Of course, if I do want to foreshadow, there are many ways I can do this. I mean, there are plenty of video games that foreshadow future combat encounters without breaking the immersion at all. You don't need to put up a big sign that says boss fight incoming. I mean, through the quest line, you can foreshadow what kind of monsters you're going to face. The opening quest of The Witcher 3 is Geralt preparing to fight a griffin, and we, the players, are well aware that we are going to fight the griffin. The whole point of this quest is to gather materials to get stuff so that you can fight the griffin. Therefore, the players know we're going to fight a griffin at some point, therefore combat. You can do a similar thing in Dungeons & Dragons, though I don't know if it's necessary in D&D campaigns. I also don't think that it's going to break the immersion if you have an NPC foreshadow that there might be combat on the horizon. In fact, it might even be more immersive for your players, who knows? Question from the 7th Seraph Officer Revolver, which is one of my favorite looking hand cannons in all of Destiny. But anyway, what do you find most boring in D&D, and what would make it more interesting in your opinion? I'm gonna be honest, there's nothing in D&D that, in my opinion, is completely boring most of the time. Like, combat is the one that a lot of people say, like, combat in D&D is boring, but I don't think that is the case, especially not most of the time. I think that combat can be rather thrilling as long as the Dungeon Master manages it properly and uses monsters in a way that is exciting and uses the right monsters. I will be frank here, a lot of the monsters in the Monster Manual are boring, and therefore, if I use them, I'm gonna spice them up a little bit, give them some extra abilities that make them stand out a bit more. I don't like how when you're fighting a zombie and you're fighting a bandit, mechanically they're functionally the same. They run up to you and they attack you. Lame. I want a bit more there, which is another reason why I am supporting Matt Colville's newest project. I think it's called Flea Mortals, where he is spicing up the monsters of the Monster Manual and giving them more abilities and more classes to make them more unique, and I love that. That's one way that I would spice up combat, even if I think that combat in D&D is usually rather fun. in terms of things I find boring all the time, I think that there's nothing really I could do to spice this up. In D&D prep for a session, when I'm prepping as a dungeon master, I do not like writing down notes before a session. It is so mind-numbing. I'm just taking the things from my head and putting them into a paper is necessary for me, just so I don't forget major details. But at the same time, it takes like 30 minutes for me to do. It is boring every time. There's not really anything thrilling about typing down a bunch of bullet points in a Google Doc. Another thing that's really boring, sorting technical difficulties with a virtual tabletop. It definitely happens. I'm using Foundry and I love Foundry to death, but because I'm running Foundry off of my own computer, therefore there's going to be some issues sometimes, and those issues can be mind-numbing to fix. I have fixed every problem that has arose with Foundry, but that doesn't mean it was fun. I don't know if those last two things count, but they are boring things that are associated with D&D, and therefore I'm going to rant about them. But yeah, I think D&D as a whole is a really fun game. Obviously, I play it a lot. I've based my entire livelihood off of it. So yeah, I enjoy it, but there are definitely things that can be on the bit of the droll side. Next question comes from Pepijn Poolman. How's the new living situation? The new living situation is great. Thanks for asking. The next question comes from the Overbro. What's your favorite glory story, whether personal or read online? So my favorite glory story would have to be a personal glory story. This comes from the end of my first campaign, the penultimate fight, not the final battle, but the battle against the Midnight King, who ended up being a pawn of the god Orcus. But anyway, the Midnight King in my homebrew world is this incredibly powerful twilight dragon, or shadow dragon, depending on what you call them. But yeah, he is incredibly strong. He's an ancient dragon. This was a big battle, and the party, they pulled out all the stops. They collected legendary relics to use in the battle. One of their allied NPCs gave one of the party members, the druid, a scroll of true polymorph, which allowed her to transform into a dragon, and they got another dragon ally on their side for this battle. They stormed the city of Draconia, where the Midnight King ruled, and fought him at the summit of the great city. And yeah, it was an intense battle. There were like 3-4 dragons on the field at once, because the Midnight King had his own buddy dragon. There was the gold dragon that they got as an ally, and then the druid turned into a dragon herself. So yeah, like 4 dragons on the fight. It was intense, to say the least, and it ended with 3 party members down. Not dead, but down, 2 people left, and the bard pulls out Prismatic Ray and rolls 7. Violet. And if you don't know what Violet does, Violet, if you fail a wisdom saving throw, which the Midnight King did, he was out of legendary resistances, if you fail the wisdom saving throw, you are teleported out of the plane of existence. So yeah, the Midnight King got teleported out of this realm of existence, and the party claimed victory in that battle. It was an amazing moment for the group. And later on, when they were fighting the Midnight King's master, Orcus, in the next session, one of the allied NPCs tells the party she has a crazy plan to stop Orcus, and the party just needs to defend her from the god's wrath, because Orcus had ascended to godhood at this point. And it was all dire straits, but the ritual is finished, and she summons the Midnight King back into the material plane. And he was betrayed by Orcus at this point. Orcus had cut him loose. So the Midnight King was pissed. And we actually got boss fight against boss fight, and it was awesome. 2 big bad evil guys going at each other is one of my favorite tropes. And yeah, this whole moment, this whole sequence of events that started with a prismatic ray of all things, well, that was everything I wanted for the end of my D&D campaign. Alright, and that is where we're going to end today's episode of Q&Play. If you guys enjoyed it, then please do leave a like. If you want to see more of my content, then please do subscribe to Crispy's Tavern to get more of my content right as it comes out. And finally, if you want to leave your own questions or thoughts, go down into the comments down below. If you cannot think of a comment, leave the comment Solar to reference the game I'm playing in the background and to let me know you made it to the end of the video. Essence, like, comment, subscribe. I will see you all next time. Farewell.